The neon lights of the gas station buzzed in the quiet Arizona night, casting an eerie glow over the cracked pavement. Daniel Cross sat in his truck, hands resting lightly on the wheel, eyes scanning the parking lot through the rearview mirror. His instincts had been screaming at him all day, that old itch at the base of his skull, the feeling that someone was watching. He took a slow breath, rolling his shoulders. He had been in witness protection for 6 months now, living under a new name, in a new town, doing everything right. Keep your head down. Stay invisible. Let the feds do their job. But deep down, he had always known this day would come. He stepped out of the truck, adjusting the baseball cap low over his face as he walked toward the gas station's entrance. The cool night air carried a faint scent of burnt rubber and asphalt, the kind of scent that reminded him of old battlefields in places far from here. He wasn't a soldier anymore. At least, that's what they told him. The clerk barely looked up as Daniel grabbed a bottle of water from the fridge, his mind already processing the environment. 3 customers, no threats. 1 clerk, nervous. Something's off. Then the door swung open and Daniel's stomach clenched. 2 men entered, moving too smoothly, too controlled. Not the sloppy bravado of street thugs. These were cartel enforcers. Daniel didn't flinch, didn't react. Keep your head down, walk away. Don't start a fight you don't need to finish. He stepped toward the counter, keeping his movements slow, unthreatening. The clerk's hands were shaking as he rang up the water bottle. His eyes flicked toward the 2 men. He was scared. One of them leaned on the counter, tapping his fingers against the glass. "Hey, amigo," he said, voice smooth, laced with casual menace. "You seen a man come through here? About your height, built like a soldier, real quiet type?" The clerk swallowed. I don't know, man." The enforcer smiled, but it never reached his eyes. "Try harder." Daniel felt the shift, the way the air in the room tightened, the way the second man took 1 slow step to the left, cutting off Daniel's escape. It was happening. Right now. They didn't know it was him yet, but they were looking for him. He kept his voice calm as he reached for his wallet. "Sounds like a dangerous man," he said casually. "What did he do?" The enforcer gave him a lazy glance. He saw something he shouldn't have. Our boss don't like loose ends. Daniel's grip tightened on his wallet. Loose ends. That's what they thought he was. He nodded, making a show of pulling out a few crumpled bills and handing them to the clerk. "Well," he said, voice even. "Hope you find him." The enforcer grinned. "Oh, we will." Daniel grabbed his water and walked toward the exit, keeping his pace steady, unhurried. 1 step, 2. The second enforcer moved. Daniel saw it coming in the reflection of the fridge glass, the shift of weight, the hand reaching under the jacket, the barely perceptible nod to his partner. They were going to jump him outside. Daniel exhaled. They had no idea who they were about to fuck with. The parking lot was empty except for his truck and an old sedan parked near the dumpster. No witnesses. The perfect place to make someone disappear. Daniel stepped out into the cool night air, already moving toward his truck. His posture was loose, relaxed, non-threatening. Behind him, the enforcers followed. His heartbeat didn't change. "Hey, amigo," one of them called. Daniel kept walking. "Hey," the voice sharpened. "I'm talking to you." Daniel reached his truck, placing his hand on the door handle. He didn't turn. "You sure you don't know anything?" Daniel heard the pistol leave the holster before he saw it, the distinctive metallic scrape of a silencer being screwed on. They weren't asking anymore. They were about to put a bullet in the back of his skull. His body moved before his mind even finished the thought. He spun, his left hand slamming the first enforcer's pistol upward, just as the suppressor hissed, missing his head by an inch. The second enforcer reached for his gun. Too slow. Daniel grabbed the first man's wrist, twisted hard, breaking the bone with a sickening snap. The pistol fell from the enforcer's grasp, and Daniel caught it midair, turning the weapon in one smooth motion and firing 2 rounds into the second man's chest. The enforcer stumbled back, gasping, blood bubbling from his mouth. The first man screamed, clutching his shattered wrist. Daniel drove his knee into the enforcer's gut, knocking the air out of him. The man dropped, coughing, choking. Daniel crouched beside him, pressing the stolen pistol against his forehead. The enforcer's eyes were wild now, filled with terror. "You work for Martinez?" Daniel asked, his voice calm. The man nodded, whimpering. Daniel sighed. Then you know what happens next. The man tried to beg, but the bullet had already left the chamber. Silence. Daniel stood, looking down at the two lifeless bodies. He grabbed his water bottle off the ground, took a slow sip, and tossed it into the trash. Then, he pulled a burner phone from his jacket and made a call. When the voice on the other end answered, he said only one thing. They found me. A long pause. Then the voice said, "Then it's time to finish this." Daniel hung up, wiped the gun clean, and placed it back in the first enforcer's hand. By the time the cops arrived, it would look like two cartel men had turned on each other. He climbed into his truck, started the engine, and drove off into the night. The cartel thought he was just a loose end to tie up. Now, they were about to learn the truth. He wasn't running anymore. He was coming for them. Daniel Cross drove with calm precision, his hands steady on the wheel, his mind already moving 3 steps ahead. The bodies of the two cartel enforcers were still cooling in the gas station parking lot, but he wasn't waiting around to see how long it took before their disappearance raised alarms. He had a head start, but not for long. The Martinez cartel wouldn't take this lightly. Men don't just disappear in their organization without consequences. They would send more, and this time, it wouldn't be a couple of enforcers with pistols and bravado. They would send killers, the kind of men he used to work with, the kind of men he used to be. The highway stretched before him, empty and dark, the desert swallowing the faint glow of his taillights. He wasn't running, not yet. Right now, he was moving, repositioning, thinking. He had spent too long in the shadows to panic now. He needed information. He needed a plan. And more than anything, he needed to go hunting before they hunted him first. The first call came an hour later. His burner phone buzzed against the dashboard, and he answered without hesitation. "Talk." The voice on the other end was calm, low, controlled. "They know," said a man named Jenkins, an old intelligence contact from the special operations days. "The two you dropped were supposed to check in 10 minutes ago. Their handler in Nogales already flagged it as a possible breach. How long until they send backup? Martinez is already moving. You've got maybe an hour before they have boots on the ground in your area, and they're not sending grunts this time." He called in Los Sicarios de la Noche. Daniel let that sit for a moment, exhaling slowly. Los Sicarios, the night killers. They weren't enforcers. They weren't hitmen. They were black bag executioners. Ex-military, trained in urban warfare, tracking, assassination, a step below the death squads used by corrupt regimes. Men who made people disappear. Men like him. "I appreciate the heads up," Daniel said, gripping the wheel a little tighter. Jenkins hesitated. "You got a plan?" Daniel's lips curled into a cold smile. "Yeah," he said. "I'm gonna kill every single one of them." The cartel's reinforcements were coming in fast. Daniel wasn't going to wait. By the time the second SUV rolled into town, he was already watching them from a rooftop across the street, his MK-12 rifle resting on a sandbag, scope trained on the blacked-out vehicle. 4 men, maybe 5. They moved like professionals, not cocky, not sloppy, controlled, tactical. They weren't here to intimidate. They were here to eliminate. Daniel exhaled, lined up his shot. The first man to step out never had a chance. The suppressed rifle snapped once, and a .223 round punched through his temple, dropping him before his boots even hit the pavement. The others reacted instantly. They were trained, after all, diving for cover, drawing their weapons, scanning for the shooter. But Daniel was already moving. He slid back from his rooftop perch, descending into the alleyway below before the first retaliatory shots even left their barrels. Gunfire shredded the bricks above him, sending fragments raining down, but Daniel was already sprinting. He knew their next move before they did. They would send 1 man to flank, 2 to hold position, and the last to get into the SUV and reposition. Predictable. He cut through the alley, his combat knife already in hand. The flanker never even saw him. Daniel moved like a whisper, catching the enforcer's wrist as he tried to raise his pistol. A quick twist, a brutal snap, and the gun fell from lifeless fingers. The knife followed, a clean slice across the throat, deep enough to silence him instantly. The body hit the dirt, twitching. 2 down. Daniel grabbed the dead man's suppressed Glock and kept moving. The remaining cartel enforcers were adjusting, their comms buzzing with panicked Spanish as they tried to lock down his position. Daniel knew he had seconds before they realized they were losing. He rounded the next corner, spotting the 2 guards huddled behind a parked car. They were scanning rooftops, expecting another sniper shot. They never expected him to be right behind them. Daniel fired twice, the Glock coughing softly. The first man dropped, a bullet carving through his spine. The second spun, tried to fire, but Daniel was already on him, one hand pushing the barrel aside, the other bringing the knife up, straight under the ribs. The man's eyes went wide as the steel buried itself in his chest. A quick, brutal twist. The fight left his body instantly. Daniel pulled the blade free, wiped it on the dead man's jacket, and turned toward the SUV. The last cartel soldier had made it inside the vehicle. The engine was already roaring to life. Daniel pulled his rifle up and put a bullet through the windshield. The glass spidered, but the driver was still alive, flooring it in reverse. Daniel stepped forward, lined up the next shot, and put a second round straight through the engine block. The SUV sputtered, died. The door flew open, the last enforcer stumbling out, hands raised. He was young, maybe early 20s, his chest heaving, his gun already on the ground. Daniel stared at him, his own rifle steady. "You with Sicarios de la Noche?" he asked, voice even. The kid nodded quickly, fear in his eyes. "You here to kill me?" Another nod. Daniel exhaled, shifting his grip on the rifle. "Then you should have brought more men." The final shot echoed across the street. Daniel stood over the carnage, his rifle cooling in his hands, his pulse barely elevated. The Sicarios were gone. Martinez was going to feel this one. This wasn't just an elimination. This was a message. He knelt, grabbing a blood-stained radio from one of the dead men, switching to their frequency. Static crackled, then a voice came through. A voice he knew, a voice he had been waiting for. Cross, Santos Martinez himself. Daniel smirked, pressing the transmit button. "You're running out of soldiers, Santos." Martinez's voice was calm, but cold. "And you're running out of places to hide." Daniel wiped the blood from his blade. "I'm not hiding. I'm hunting." Silence. Then Martinez said, "So am I." The radio went dead. Daniel dropped it onto one of the bodies, turned, and walked away. The cartel wasn't just hunting a witness anymore. Now, they were at war with a Green Beret who had nothing left to lose, and he wasn't going to stop until every last one of them was dead. Daniel Cross drove in silence, the hum of his truck's engine the only sound cutting through the desert night. The wind rushed past the open window, carrying with it the faint scent of gunpowder, blood, and gasoline from the fight he had just left behind. His hands were steady on the wheel, his mind calm, his heartbeat as slow and even as it had always been before a mission. Because that's what this was now. Not survival, not evasion. This was a mission. Martinez had sent Los Sicarios de la Noche, his best hunters, his most efficient killers, and Daniel had buried them in the dirt, just like he had done to men far more dangerous in places far worse than this. Martinez had underestimated him. That wouldn't happen again. Now, the cartel knew exactly who they were dealing with, and that meant Martinez wasn't going to send more men piecemeal. No more squads, no more hit teams. He was going to send everything. Daniel adjusted his grip on the wheel, scanning the horizon. He had maybe a few hours before the next wave of hell came crashing down. That was fine. He had work to do. The gas station looked abandoned, the flickering light above the entrance casting erratic shadows across the pavement. Daniel pulled in, parking the truck near the edge of the lot where he could watch the road while keeping an easy escape route open. He stepped out, checking the lot. No cars, no movement. That didn't mean no threats. He moved inside, stepping past the empty register, ignoring the security camera that was undoubtedly still running. The clerk, a skinny kid with a faded hoodie, barely looked up from his phone. "You got payphones?" Daniel asked. The kid raised an eyebrow. "Man, what year do you think this is?" Daniel sighed, pulled a burner phone from his pocket, and slid a $100 bill across the counter. "You got a quiet back room?" The kid looked at the money, then at Daniel, then back at the money. He pocketed the cash and jerked his thumb toward a storage closet in the back. "Be my guest." Daniel moved inside, shut the door, and dialed. The line rang once, then twice. Then a voice, calm and familiar. "You're still alive," Jenkins said. "For now." "That gonna change soon?" Daniel smirked. "Depends on what you can do for me." Jenkins exhaled on the other end of the line, the sound of keys clacking on a keyboard following. "Tell me what you need." "Cartel logistics," Daniel said. "Martinez is done playing. He's going to burn this whole town to the ground if I don't stop him first." Jenkins whistled. "Well, that's one way to kick the hornet's nest." "Already did," Daniel said. "Need to know where to hit back before they regroup." Jenkins went quiet for a few moments. Then the sound of papers shifting, a mouse clicking. "All right, listen up," Jenkins said. "Martinez moves his major operations through a handful of hubs, one in Nogales, one in El Paso, and one about 60 miles east of your position in a ranch-turned-trafficking depot. You take that out, you cripple his ability to move weapons and soldiers for at least a week." "A week?" Daniel muttered. "I need something more permanent." "You kill Martinez. It's permanent," Jenkins said. "But getting to him, that's the trick." Daniel checked his watch. 2 hours until sunrise. "I'll start with the ranch," he said. Jenkins sighed. "You do realize you're about to storm a heavily armed cartel compound by yourself, right?" Daniel smiled. "Wouldn't be the first time." Jenkins chuckled. "Fair enough. You need backup?" Daniel considered it. The old team was scattered, some retired, some buried, some still playing the government's game. He had fought alone before. But this wasn't just a military objective. This was personal. "No backup," he said. "Just need the blueprints." "Sending them now," Jenkins said. "And Daniel, try not to get yourself killed." "No promises," Daniel said. He ended the call and stepped out of the back room. The clerk looked up, raising an eyebrow. You, need anything else?" Daniel pulled another $100 bill from his pocket and slid it across the counter. "If anyone asks, you never saw me." The kid grinned. "Saw who?" Daniel nodded and walked out, already planning the next kill. The Martinez cartel's trafficking hub was a former ranch, its barbed wire fences now lined with security cameras and armed guards. A long dirt road led up to the main building, where 2 SUVs sat parked near a collection of shipping containers. It was midnight shift, which meant fewer men, less movement, but not less danger. Daniel parked his truck a mile out and moved on foot, silent, invisible. The first guard stood by the gate, smoking a cigarette, his rifle slung lazily over his shoulder. He wasn't expecting an attack. Daniel came up behind him, one arm around the man's throat, the other driving a knife up under his ribs. The guard didn't make a sound. Daniel eased the body down, checked his watch. 1 hour until sunrise. Time to end this. He moved toward the main house, slipping through the shadows, his mind working like it always had. Assess, adapt, eliminate. A second guard stood near the SUVs, checking his phone. Daniel took one silent step behind him, pressed a suppressed pistol to his temple, and pulled the trigger. 2 down. The compound was waking up. A door opened. 2 more guards stepped out, stretching, yawning. Daniel raised his rifle and fired twice, dropping both before they could react. The gunshots weren't suppressed. The alarm had been sounded. Men shouted inside, weapons clattering, boots pounding against the dirt as they rushed toward the noise. Daniel pulled a grenade from his vest, pulled the pin, and lobbed it through the open door. The explosion shook the walls, sending fire and shrapnel flying. Screams followed. Daniel moved through the smoke, his rifle up, taking down anyone still standing. By the time the dust settled, everyone inside was dead. Daniel grabbed a radio off one of the bodies, switching to the cartel's frequency. He pressed the button. "Martinez," he said, voice calm. Silence. Then the cartel boss himself answered. "You're making this personal, Cross." Daniel looked at the bodies around him. "I thought it already was." Martinez exhaled. "You can't kill me." "Not yet," Daniel said. "But I'll get there." The radio cut to static. Daniel dropped it and walked out, already planning the next move. Martinez was running out of time. And Daniel? He was just getting started. The bodies were still warm when Daniel Cross stepped over them, his rifle hanging loosely in his grip. Smoke curled from the shattered door of the cartel's trafficking hub, the air thick with the metallic stench of blood and gunpowder. The night was quiet again, save for the distant coyote howls and the occasional crackle of flames from a truck he had torched. He had cut through the Martinez cartel's logistics like a scalpel, but this was only step one. Martinez wasn't the kind of man to let something like this slide. Daniel knew exactly what was coming next. He needed to move. He grabbed an AK-47 from one of the dead men, swapping it for his nearly empty rifle. He slung the strap over his shoulder, grabbing spare magazines from the cartel's stockpile. Every bullet he picked up would be used to carve Martinez's empire into the dirt. Then, the radio crackled. "Cross!" The voice was ragged, filled with restrained fury. "You're running out of places to hide." Martinez. Daniel smirked, pressing the transmit button. "I'm not hiding, Santos. I'm hunting." A low chuckle came through the static. "You think killing a few men makes a difference? You think I haven't bled before?" Daniel glanced at the bodies scattered across the compound. "You're bleeding now." A long silence followed. Then Martinez exhaled, a slow and deliberate sound. "You killed my men," he said, voice eerily calm. "So now, I'm going to kill everyone around you." Daniel's grip on the radio tightened. Martinez continued. "Your friends, your contacts, anyone who's ever given you shelter, they'll die screaming. And you'll be the last one, so you can feel it." The radio cut out. Daniel stood in the middle of the corpses, listening to the dead air, his jaw tightening. He had spent years hunting men like Martinez, cowards who pretended to be kings, who killed from a distance and let others do their dirty work. But this was different. Martinez had just made this personal. Daniel grabbed the last of his supplies and vanished into the desert. By dawn, Daniel was already moving. He drove for hours, switching between back roads and dirt paths, keeping his route unpredictable. The cartel would be watching highways and checkpoints, looking for any sign of him. He had to stay ahead. The sun was rising, burning the horizon in deep oranges and reds when he reached the safe house. It was nothing more than a run-down mechanic shop on the edge of a ghost town, a place that had once been a waypoint for smugglers and outlaws before the modern world made them obsolete. Daniel pulled the truck into the garage, stepping out and scanning the area. No movement, no sounds beyond the wind whistling through abandoned buildings. Jenkins had set this place up years ago, back when they were still running missions together. It wasn't meant to be a permanent hideout, just a stopgap, a place to regroup before the next fight. Daniel stepped inside, flicking on the dim overhead light. The interior was sparse, a cot, a weapons locker, a satellite phone mounted on the wall. He crossed the room and grabbed the phone, dialing the only number that mattered. Jenkins answered on the first ring. "Jesus, Cross, I was starting to think you finally bought it." Daniel grabbed a bottle of water from the mini fridge, cracking it open. "Not yet." Jenkins sighed. "I heard about the hit on Martinez's depot. That was loud, man. You didn't just kick the hornet's nest, you burned it down." "Good," Daniel said. "Martinez just called me, said he's coming after my contacts." Jenkins muttered a curse under his breath. "You know what that means, right? He's not just sending enforcers this time. He's sending cleaners." Daniel's jaw clenched. The cartel's cleaner teams weren't like the sicarios de la noche. They weren't sent to intimidate or eliminate threats in a gunfight. They were sent to wipe people off the map. Jenkins continued. "We need to get ahead of this. I've been digging into Martinez's network. He's got a high-value meeting in 48 hours. Private airstrip, middle of nowhere, but it's a direct link to his international operations. You hit that, you cripple him for good." Daniel took a slow breath. 48 hours. That wasn't a lot of time. "Send me the details," he said. Jenkins hesitated. "You sure you want to do this alone?" Daniel's grip tightened around the phone. "No loose ends." Jenkins sighed. "All right, I'll send the coordinates. But Cross?" "Yeah? Finish this, one way or another." Daniel hung up and checked his watch. He had less than 2 days before Martinez locked down his empire, which meant he had to hit first. He opened the weapons locker, pulling out an M4 carbine, extra ammo, and enough explosives to turn Martinez's meeting into a funeral. The cartel wanted a war. They were about to get one. Martinez's men moved fast. By the time Daniel left the safe house, they were already cleaning up his trail. The first sign came as he approached the small town of Santo Viejo, a burning wreckage on the side of the road. Daniel slowed the truck, scanning the scene. The car had been torched, its windows shattered, the frame blackened. A body was slumped against the driver's side, head tilted at an unnatural angle. Daniel pulled to a stop, rifle ready, and stepped out. He moved carefully, checking for movement, but the killers were already gone. The body was a contact of his, a local who had once helped smuggle assets across the border for the CIA. Now he was a message, a bullet hole between the eyes, a cartel insignia carved into his chest. They were tying up loose ends. Daniel's hands curled into fists. He had seen this kind of brutality before. He had spent years dismantling men like Martinez, and he knew exactly what this was. This wasn't revenge. This was cleansing. Martinez wasn't just killing people who knew Daniel, he was erasing them. Daniel took a slow breath, forcing himself to stay focused. Anger wouldn't help him. Violence would. He climbed back into the truck, gunned the engine, and turned toward Martinez's last known location. No more waiting, no more hiding. This ended now. The sun hung low over the desert as Daniel Cross drove down a barren highway, his hands gripping the wheel like a vice. The heat shimmered off the asphalt in the distance, distorting the horizon into waves of liquid gold. He had driven these roads before, back when he was still under contract, back when his missions had been sanctioned, and his kills had been signed off on by men in suits thousands of miles away. But this wasn't a mission. This was personal. Martinez had made his move, and now there were bodies on the roadside, old contacts being erased like they had never existed. A cartel purge, a systematic cleanup. And Daniel was running out of time. He pressed down on the accelerator, the engine growling as he pushed the truck past 90. The coordinates Jenkins had sent him flashed in his mind. A private airstrip in the middle of the desert. A meeting that was set to decide the future of Martinez's empire. The cartel boss was consolidating power, tightening his grip, preparing for the next phase of expansion. Daniel wasn't going to let that happen. He checked the time. 27 hours until the meeting. Not a lot of time, but enough. By nightfall, he had crossed into cartel territory. The town of El Sombrero sat nestled in the valley, a forgotten place now owned entirely by Martinez's people. The last time the police had set foot here, they had been sent back in body bags. The locals stayed silent, the businesses paid their dues, and anyone who didn't fell into the graves dug just outside of town. Daniel drove through slow, keeping his head down, his eyes scanning every movement on the street. Armed men lingered on corners, watching cars that passed through, checking for threats, for outsiders. If they recognized him, it was over. He parked in front of a rundown motel, an old neon sign flickering, advertising rooms that hadn't seen a real guest in years. He stepped out of the truck, adjusting his baseball cap low over his eyes as he walked toward the entrance. The motel's front desk clerk barely looked up. A thin man with hollow eyes, cigarette dangling from his lips, his fingers tapping nervously against the counter. "I need a room," Daniel said. The clerk's eyes flicked to the scars on Daniel's hands, to the way he moved, silent, efficient, like a man who had done things that didn't fit into a normal life. "You ain't from here," the clerk muttered. Daniel slid $200 bills across the counter. "Now I am..." The clerk took the money, slid a key across the counter, and said nothing else. Daniel grabbed the key, turned, and walked toward the room without another word. Inside the room, he set his gear down on the battered wooden table and began laying out his plan. First, he took out his M4 carbine, checking the magazine, ensuring every round was clean, precise. Then came the suppressed Glock, extra magazines, a combat knife, the same one he had used in Black Ops missions a lifetime ago. Next came the explosives, homemade charges, trip mines, and C4 packs rigged with remote detonators. The airstrip was going to be heavily guarded, with more firepower than he could handle in a straight fight. But he wasn't going in for a firefight. He was going in for an execution. His plan was simple: plant the explosives around the airstrip, take out as many of Martinez's men as possible, then finish the job up close. The cartel boss wouldn't walk away from this. Daniel wouldn't let him. The motel room phone rang, the old rotary dial rattling against the wood. Daniel didn't answer at first. He just sat there, staring at it, listening to the distant murmur of traffic outside, the occasional bark of a dog in the alleyway. Then, he reached over and picked it up. No one spoke at first. Then a voice, low, familiar. You're not subtle, Cross. Jenkins. Daniel leaned back against the wall. Not trying to be? Jenkins sighed. You're inside cartel territory, sitting in a goddamn motel like you're just passing through. You know Martinez probably already knows you're here, right? If he did, I'd already be dead, Daniel said. Jenkins was quiet for a moment. This thing at the airstrip, are you sure about it? Daniel closed his eyes, running a hand over his face. You know the answer. Yeah, Jenkins muttered. I do. A pause. Then Jenkins added, Martinez isn't just bringing his own men to that meeting. He's got mercs, foreign contractors, guys who fought in Afghanistan and switched sides when the money was better. This isn't just a cartel sit-down. It's a goddamn war council. Daniel's fingers tightened around the receiver. That meant Martinez wasn't just locking down his empire, he was expanding it. If this meeting went as planned, Martinez wouldn't just be a cartel boss. He'd be a warlord. Daniel exhaled through his nose. All the more reason to stop it. You don't have backup, Jenkins said. I don't need backup, Daniel replied. Jenkins sighed. All right, I'll send you what I have. Satellite images, known personnel attending the meeting, security layout. A beat of silence then. If you don't make it out, I'll make sure your body doesn't end up in some mass grave. Daniel smirked. Appreciate it. The line went dead. He set the receiver down and looked at his gear. He had one night to prepare, one shot to take out an empire, and when the sun rose, the desert would be drenched in blood. Daniel left the motel under the cover of darkness, his weapons secured, his mind locked into mission mode. He drove the truck toward the airstrip, parking 3 miles out, switching to foot travel. The night was hot, the air thick with dust, the distant hum of insects filling the silence. The airstrip loomed ahead, its chain-link fences topped with barbed wire, guard towers casting long shadows. He counted at least 20 men patrolling, their movements precise, organized. This wasn't just a cartel operation. This was a fortress. But Daniel wasn't planning on going through the front gate. He was going to blow the whole damn place apart. Creeping through the desert brush, he moved without a sound, his body low to the ground, his knife clenched in one hand. He reached the first patrol, 2 men standing by the fence, smoking, their rifles slung lazily over their shoulders. They weren't ready for a real fight. Daniel moved fast, grabbing the first man from behind, his knife slicing clean across the throat. The second man turned, too slow. Daniel buried the knife in his ribs, twisting hard, feeling the life drain from him. He dragged the bodies into the brush, covered the blood, and moved on. This was just the beginning. By the time the first explosion went off, Daniel would already be inside. And when he was done, Martinez's entire criminal empire would be nothing but dust. The night stretched out like a vast ocean of darkness, the airstrip sitting in its center like a fortress of shadows and steel. The hum of distant engines droned against the desert silence, the sound of power, of men who thought they were untouchable. Daniel Cross lay prone in the sand just beyond the outer fence, his body still as stone, his heartbeat a steady rhythm in his chest. He had been here before, in places far worse, waiting for the right moment to strike. The airstrip was alive with movement. Armed men patrolled in pairs, sweeping the perimeter with trained efficiency. This wasn't just cartel muscle. These were mercenaries, men who had fought in war zones, men who knew how to kill. Floodlights carved through the darkness, illuminating the tarmac where 3 private jets sat waiting, engines warm, ready to leave at a moment's notice. Martinez was here. So were his war council, other high-ranking cartel leaders, arms dealers, corrupt officials, men who wanted to turn the drug trade into something even more dangerous. If Daniel let this meeting happen, Martinez wouldn't just be a kingpin. He would be an untouchable force, a warlord controlling his own army. That couldn't happen. Daniel exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of the rifle against his shoulder. He had spent the past 2 hours planting explosives around the compound, placing charges at key points, fuel depots, security posts, main exits. The first explosion would be a signal. The rest would be a massacre. He moved his crosshairs to the nearest patrol, 2 men walking along the fence, rifles at the ready. He took a slow breath, let it out, and squeezed the trigger. The suppressed round punched through the first man's skull, sending him crumpling to the dirt without a sound. The second man turned too late. Daniel fired again, a single shot through the throat. Both bodies lay still, the night swallowing them whole. Daniel moved fast, staying low, his boots barely whispering against the sand as he reached the fence. He cut through the wire, slipping inside, his pistol already drawn. The first explosion went off near the fuel depot. A thunderous boom ripped through the night, sending a fireball into the sky, the flames licking hungrily at the darkness. The shockwave knocked men off their feet, sending crates and debris flying. Screams filled the air. Panic set in. The mercenaries shouted orders, scrambling for cover, trying to understand where the attack was coming from. Some rushed toward the burning wreckage, others toward the jets, thinking the attack was coming from outside the perimeter. They didn't know. It was already inside. Daniel moved like a shadow, slipping between containers, keeping to the blind spots. A guard rounded the corner, rifle raised. Daniel pressed his gun against the man's ribs and pulled the trigger. The mercenary dropped without a sound. Daniel kept moving. Another explosion erupted near the security tower, cutting off communications. Gunfire echoed from all sides now. Confusion, chaos. And in the center of it all, Martinez. Daniel spotted him near the second jet, flanked by 2 bodyguards, shouting into a radio. His suit was pristine, his movements controlled, but there was panic in his eyes. Good. Daniel took cover behind a stack of crates, reloading. Martinez was trying to escape, trying to get to his jet before the flames consumed the entire airstrip. That wasn't happening. Daniel lifted his rifle, lined up the shot. And then, a bullet slammed into the crate beside his head. He barely had time to roll away as 3 mercenaries closed in, their rifles flashing in the darkness. Splinters rained down as rounds chewed through the wooden crates, forcing Daniel to move fast, sprinting toward the nearest cover. He hit the ground behind a fuel drum, bullets still tearing through the air around him. He needed to deal with these guys, fast. A mercenary rushed him, gun raised. Daniel lunged forward, grabbing the barrel and twisting hard. The rifle went off, the shot going wide as Daniel drove his knife deep into the man's throat. Blood sprayed. The second mercenary tried to flank him. Daniel yanked the dying man's gun free and fired before the next enemy could react. The round hit center mass, dropping him instantly. The third man hesitated. Daniel didn't. A single bullet to the head ended the fight. He turned back toward Martinez. The cartel boss was running now, sprinting toward the jet, shoving past his own men to reach safety. Daniel switched his rifle back to single shot, took aim, and fired. The bullet clipped Martinez's shoulder, sending him spinning. He crashed to the ground, screaming. His guards scrambled, dragging him toward the stairs of the jet. Daniel knew he wouldn't get another clear shot. He grabbed the detonator from his vest, flipped the switch, and pressed the button. The last explosion tore through the landing gear of the jet, sending the aircraft collapsing onto the tarmac, flames consuming the fuselage. Martinez was trapped. Daniel moved in. The remaining cartel soldiers were either dead or fleeing, their loyalty vanishing the moment the tables turned. Martinez, bleeding, stumbled toward an SUV, one hand pressing against his wound, his breathing ragged. Daniel reached him before he could get inside. Martinez froze as Daniel pressed the barrel of his pistol against his forehead. For the first time, the cartel boss looked afraid. "You should have left me alone," Daniel said, voice calm, steady. Martinez swallowed hard, eyes darting to the side, looking for a way out. "You can't kill me, Cross. You know what happens if you do." Daniel cocked his head. "Enlighten me." "You kill me, another takes my place," Martinez wheezed. "That's how this works." Daniel stared at him for a long moment. Then he smirked. "Not if I kill all of you." Martinez's eyes widened. The gunshot echoed across the airstrip. Martinez's body slumped to the ground, blood pooling beneath him. Daniel exhaled, rolling his shoulders, listening to the last flames crackling around him. It was over. The cartel's war council was dead. Martinez's empire was crumbling. He had done what he set out to do, and now he was free. He turned, leaving the bodies behind, vanishing into the night. By the time the authorities arrived, there would be nothing left of the Martinez cartel but ashes.